Okay, let's take a look at an infallible flowchart of what would be the best camera to recommend. Obviously I get asked a lot of questions about what is the best camera, and of course that's an improper question. The question is A, what's your budget? B, what is it that you are shooting? And C, what are your plans as far as what budget you have for lenses, or what selection of lenses that you have. So we got a three-tiered question before making a logical choice. Now there are a string of cameras that I've left out over here to the side, and the only caveat for possible purchase of them is that if you can find them in great shape, very crazy cheap, and that would be the D3000 series, D5000 series, D800, D800E, D600, and D610. These cameras do not fit into any applicable category as a best choice unless you can find them just crazy cheap, and they really don't exist that way right now. So I can't recommend them as fitting into any category here. Ultimately right now I have up at top 8 different cameras: D3, D700, D7000, D7100, D7200, D750, D810, and D4S. D4S is obviously extremely limited choice. It is about to be superseded. But D3000, D5000 series, while certainly good enough for any level of photography as far as sensor and ultimate picture rendition, they're ultimately more expensive, as I've stated before in the past, without end, in that they don't have screw drives for driving the autofocus of D-series lenses, and they also don't have the capacity for non-CPU metering. Likewise, the price on the D600, D610, and D800 do not let these cameras fit into any applicable category in here as a best choice given any possible tier of circumstance, whether it's budget or what sort of shooter you plan on, what sort of shooter you are, or what sort of shooting you plan on doing. So that is the logical reason why these cameras are left out. Very good logical reasons. Now we have 5 categories of budget: 200 to 500, 600 to 900, 1,000 to 1,500, 2,000 plus, and over here, obviously it doesn't apply to most people, unlimited budget, or if you're doing it as a business, or it can be a tax write-off. So looking at the $200 to $500 budget, your choices are obviously extremely limited. Right now, obviously things are fluid and change. The only possible choice is an Nikon D7000 used, mint to great shape, 400, 450, roughly, oftentimes even as cheap as $360, $380. An excellent choice. It can has a screw drive for driving D-series lenses. It can do non-CPU metering, and it's a great choice for an extremely low budget. And I would actually purchase it over D3000 and D5000 series camera. Now let's look at some of the categories that some of these cameras fall into as far as making a choice, and that will help you make a better decision depending on what your budget is and what sort of shooting that you do, whether you're a business shooter, a general shooter, an advanced shooter, or a nature shooter, or what sort of shooting you're going to do in one of 3 different sort of categories that it's going to steer your purchase choice as far as one of these 8 models. That would be a low light shooter, or a club shooter, or a night/events shooter. Whether you're going to do sports action, or you're going to do wildlife shooting that you need DX pixel density so you can do some serious crops and still retain subject detail. Whether you going to be shooting landscapes and vistas where you need a higher megapixel camera, or one without an anti-aliasing filter. Let's take a look at the first 2. These are discontinued models. These are older cameras, D3, D700, respectively. Relative price is $1,500 and $700, plus or minus a couple $100 depending on the condition and how much somebody wants. These are long life tanks. They're made to go and rock and rock and rock. D700 produces images like nothing else. They both have high buffers, and if you throw in the larger battery on the vertical grip on the D700, you can get up to, I think it was at 11 frames per second on the Nikon, 8 frames per second on the Nikon D700, excuse me. They both got high buffers. They're both full frame cameras. They are low megapixel cameras, but ultimately you have to ask yourself, what are you doing? I mean, are you, do you need some seriously large prints? Because the 20 by 30 prints produced by either one of these is more than exquisite. So even though they're 12.1 megapixel cameras, they'll still spit out beautiful 20 by 30 prints. I mean, these used to be insanely expensive cameras, $5,000 and $3,000 respectively. So they're both full frame. They are best idealized as perfect best backup cameras. Like, you need a secondary camera, something that's going to last forever and ever and ever, although anything breaks, obviously. They're also both perfect for sports and action photography due to their buffer. The D3, D700 are excellent choices. D7000, $400. We got three choices here in the DX. We have D7000, 7100, and 7200. As far as all of these actually have, the D7000, D7100 are both low buffer cameras. So if you're going to be shooting sports action, which also includes overlap with low light and club scenes where you need a decent buffer, then these are not winners if you need a larger buffer. So these are low buffer cameras. As far as clicking off some serious frames per second. Next in the series we have high buffers all across the board here in D7200, D750, D810, and D4S. The best low light winners unquestionably are the D7200 and D750. So if you're a low light shooter, you'll be shooting clubs, events, low lights, late night parties, whatnot. These are your two choices, which are excellent. Now the price right now, gray market on the D7200 is averaging between $950. D750 gray market $1,500, although they've come down in price just a hair recently since then. All of these from D7200, D750, D810, and D4S, all of these have high buffers. Okay. Anti-aliasing filter is present on the D750, which makes it not the best idealized landscape camera. Now, one issue, if you want to call it an issue, that both of these have Sony sensors, is that the output on these and the 80 conversion between the D7200 and D750, they are rather low. D750 is actually a revamped D600 image sensor by Sony. They do have low contrast output, so if low contrast images are, of course you can obviously tweak anything in post, but the actual output, the D7200, D750, is low contrast. Now all of these from D7200 over the D4S are perfect sports action cameras. Now best cameras for landscape and vistas, well, D750 is more than adequate. D810 has no anti-aliasing filter, it is 36 megapixel. Both of these are full frame cameras as well as the D750, so actually I need to go over here like that. These are all full frames here. DX lenses are from here to here, D7000 to D7200. D750 and over, full frame cameras. Perfect landscape camera unquestionably is a Nikon D810. Gray market price has dropped down too, as I've seen, as cheap as $2,300. If you're going to do serious sports action photography and money is no object to you at all, the D4S is still an excellent choice. It's incredible in low light autofocus, and it's absolutely incredible in buffer. I mean, the thing is just an absolute machine gun, but so is the D3 for far, far less at $1,500. So you need to ask yourself, what is your budget? $200 to $500, $600 to $900. Most people's budget on a primary camera falls between $600 and $900, and that number one choice is unquestionably the Nikon D7100. Next level up, $1,000, $1,500. You have to ask yourself, well, is it a choice between D7200 and D750? If you've got a budget between $1,000 and $1,500, the unquestionable choice is a Nikon D750, just flat out. $2,000 or above, if you have that budgeted for your DSLR camera, the unquestionable choice is the Nikon D810. Now, do you need to spend that much? The question is also then, how much glass do you have? Do you have any speed lights? I mean, do you have enough lenses? Are you changing formats? So all of these factors need to be brought into the equation, but you have 3 or 4 tiers, depending on how you look at it, of what you need to examine before making the correct choice. One is what's your budget for your camera. This is not considering what you need to spend on your lenses. You've got one of 5 different price brackets here. You need to ask yourself, what sort of shooter are you? A business shooter, a general shooter, an advanced shooter, or you're a nature shooter? What is your intentions for primary use of this camera? Low light club scenes and events? Or is this sports action and wildlife photography? Or do you need DX pixel density, so you're going to use a 300 or 400 millimeter lens. You can do some serious cropping of far off distant wildlife, in which case the best choice would be Nikon D7100, D7200. D7100, D7200, as far as pixel density scaled up, if these were full frame sensors, they would be 54 megapixel sensors if they were scaled up to a full frame sensor size. If you're going to be a landscape or vista shooter, obviously your choices are far more limited. The D7100 does have better color contrast, better saturation than the Nikon D7200 does. D7100 is the Toshiba sensor, D7200 is a Sony sensor. D7200, D750, DX camera and FX camera, these are low contrast image production. All this can be tweaked in post. I don't really have an issue with it. But as far as contrast or pop or wow or whatever you want to call it, these are definitely the lowest on the rung. Actually, D7000 is very comparable. So you actually have three low contrast image outputs: D7000, 7200, D750. Not a serious issue at all. D750 is a revamped D600 processor. Now, if you're a landscape shooter, if you can swing $2,300 for a gray market D810, that would certainly be the ideal choice by far. But so that you can make an accurate choice, I've actually seen nobody else produce a chart like this online, and of course this is fluid. It's not going to change anytime. It's not going to change until at least right near Christmas or probably after Christmas. So this is going to remain valid for at least, this chart's going to remain valid for at least the next 6 months. And the logical reasonings of accepting of not including D3000, D5000 series, D800, D600, or D610 are very logical. They do not fit within any category or any tier of either budget or use or intent, because there is a superior choice to these cameras. I can't recommend them. That's why they are left out. So I know you're going to ask that question, so I actually have to explain why they were left out. D3 and D700 are best, unquestionable best cheap backup cameras, but they're certainly perfectly fine primary cameras. Now, if you, ultimately you have to ask yourself, what are you be doing with these pictures? I mean, you're taking wedding photography. I mean, is this a business? If it's so, then it's going to be a tax write-off, and you really don't need to, don't need to concern yourself so highly with the cost. You need to ask yourself if you're a sports action shooter or a low-light shooter, but what's your budget? What sort of shooter are you? What are you shooting? These are the three primary questions, and this is all assuming that you have enough lenses to cover. I mean, you've got the budget already set aside for lenses. This is the budget for the DSLR only. So here are your choices, and here is how things break down as far as each DSLR is as far as what it is best for. Sports action over here, low contrast here on these sensors, including the Nikon D7000. And here we have a landscape Vista camera D810, which is high megapixel count. Also, no anti-aliasing filter. We have a high buffer, perfect for sports action. But also the D3 and D700 are also perfect for sports action. Their best backups are full frame. They're high buffer. They're absolute frigging tanks. Nothing produces images like the D700. It stands alone from any other Nikon before or since. You can Google images on that. It is extremely unique. Well, that's it. Ask me any questions, and I gave a long thought into a creation of this chart. And I guess that's it. Just drop me some questions and let me know if I could help, okay?